On a cold morning in the autumn of 1959, an old man in a gray uniform is standing at the elevator bank inside Rockefeller Center in Manhattan. He is 64 years old. His back is straight. His hands, folded behind him, are scarred in places no one ever asks about. The brass nameplate on his jacket says only his last name. Underneath the jacket, pinned inside the lapel where the businessman cannot see it, is a small red ribbon. The ribbon is the Légion d'honneur. It is the highest decoration the Republic of France can give to a human being. The doors open. Two men in gray suits step inside. They are talking about a deal in Pittsburgh. They do not look at the operator. The operator says, "Good morning, sir," and pushes the brass lever, and the cabin begins to rise. His name is Eugene Jacques Bullard. He has flown 20 combat missions over the Western Front. He has fought for France in 2 world wars. He speaks 5 languages. He once owned a jazz club where Hemingway drank. The men in the elevator have no idea who he is. Most days, neither does anyone else. 19 years earlier, in the summer of 1940, he was 44 years old and crawling through a hedgerow outside the French city of Orleans with a rifle in his hands. The German army had broken through the Ardennes that May. By June, the French line was collapsing in pieces. Eugene Bullard, who had been living above his jazz club on the Rue Pigalle in Paris, had walked into a recruiting office and told them he wanted to enlist again. The officer looked at his file. The file said he was an American citizen. The file also said he had served in the French Foreign Legion in the last war, and that he had been decorated for it. The officer signed the papers. Bullard joined the 51st Infantry Regiment. They were thrown into the defense of Orleans, where there was no defense left to make. He was wounded in the spine by a shell fragment. He was carried out by 2 younger men who did not know that the older man on the stretcher had once strapped himself into a biplane in 1916 and flown into the same German army from above. Before the wound, before the regiment, he had done something else for France. The jazz club on the Rue Pigalle had been called Le Grand Duc. German officers had begun coming in for the music after the occupation. Bullard had been quietly approached by a French counterintelligence officer, and the officer had asked him a question. Did Monsieur Bullard, the officer wanted to know, still speak German? He did. He had picked it up as a boy on a German freighter and polished it in the Foreign Legion. He kept pouring drinks. He kept his face neutral. He listened to the officers at the back tables, and he passed what he heard to the resistance until the Gestapo began asking too many questions and his contact told him to run. He ran south through occupied France with a wound that had not fully healed, across the Pyrenees on foot, into Spain, out of Spain on a ship, into the harbor of New York City, in July of 1940, holding a French passport and almost nothing else. He arrived in his birth country a decorated veteran of 2 French wars and a refugee from a 3rd. He spoke 5 languages. He had run a famous club. He could not get a job. To understand why, you have to go back 45 years to a small farmhouse outside Columbus, Georgia. Eugene Jacques Bullard was born on October 9, 1895. His father, William Bullard, was the son of Haitian refugees, descendants of the men who had fought their own revolution 100 years before. His mother was Creek, a Native American woman who died when Eugene was small. He grew up in a house where French and English were spoken in equal measure, in a town where the color of his skin was a daily problem. When Eugene was around 8 years old, a white mob came for his father. The reasons were the reasons that did not need to be reasons in Georgia at the turn of the century. William Bullard hid in the loft of a barn that night. The boy listened from the house to the men outside calling his father's name. His father lived. Eugene did not stay to find out if it would happen again. At 8, he ran away from home. He worked his way north, sleeping in barns, watching horses for traveling men. By 11, he had reached the docks of Norfolk, Virginia. He stowed away on a German freighter bound for Aberdeen, Scotland. He landed in Britain with no money and no plan, and he survived. He worked as a stagehand. He learned to take a punch in a vaudeville troupe of acrobats. He grew into a boxer, then a professional boxer, and the boxing took him to Paris in 1913. Paris, he would say later, was the first place in his life that he felt like a whole person. When the Great War began in August of 1914, he walked into a recruiting office on the Boulevard des Invalides and signed up for the French Foreign Legion. He was 18 years old. The Legion did not care where a man came from. It only cared whether he could march and whether he could fight. Eugene Bullard could do both. He marched into the trenches of the Somme. He marched into the killing ground at Verdun. He was wounded more than once. He was decorated for valor at Verdun and given the Croix de Guerre. By 1916, the French infantry had eaten enough of him that he applied for a transfer to a service he had never seen up close. He applied to the French Air Service. There was no precedent. There were no black combat pilots in the world. The French training corps looked at his file, looked at his medal, and accepted him anyway. He spent the spring and summer of 1916 learning to fly. In November, he received his pilot's brevet. He was 21 years old, and he was, by the records of every air service on Earth, the first known black military aviator in history. He flew with Escadrille N.93 and then with SPA.85. He completed 20 combat missions. He claimed one confirmed German kill, though his squadron believed there had been a second one that fell behind the lines and could not be counted. His squadron mascot was a rhesus monkey he had bought in a Paris market and named Jimmy. Jimmy flew with him in the cockpit on most of his patrols, wearing a small leather harness. In 1917, the United States entered the war. The American Army Air Service began screening American volunteers serving in France for transfer to American squadrons. The screening was rapid. The white volunteers were transferred. Eugene Bullard, who had more combat hours than most of them, was not. The official reason was a medical disqualification. The actual reason was on his skin. He flew out the war in French uniform. When the armistice came, he was 23 years old, with a confirmed kill, the Croix de Guerre, and a country that had refused to see him. He went back to Paris. In the 1920s, the Rue Pigalle was the center of black American jazz expatriate life, and Eugene Bullard was at the center of the Rue Pigalle. He owned a club called Le Grand Duc. The clientele included a young newspaperman named Ernest Hemingway, a novelist named F. Scott Fitzgerald, a dancer named Josephine Baker, and, on certain nights, a trumpet player passing through Europe named Louis Armstrong. Bullard tended bar. He managed the music. He married a French woman, had 2 daughters, and lived in the kind of life he could not have imagined from the loft of the barn in Georgia. That life ended in 1940, with the German columns on the road from Sedan. He stepped off the ship in New York in July of that year, wounded and almost penniless. He went looking for work. He found that the country he had been born in was the country he had left. He took the only jobs he could get: perfume salesman, longshoreman, manual labor. Eventually, in the late 1940s, the manager of Rockefeller Center hired him to operate one of the passenger elevators. He took the job. He showed up on time. He kept the ribbon under his lapel. In September of 1949, he traveled north to Peekskill, New York, to attend an outdoor concert by the singer Paul Robeson. The concert had been organized for an integrated audience. A mob of several thousand men, encouraged by a cordon of state troopers who stood aside, attacked the concertgoers as they tried to leave. Cars were overturned. Skulls were broken. A newsreel camera caught what happened next. The newsreel shows a small dark man in a coat being struck repeatedly across the head and shoulders by 2 uniformed state troopers. The man does not fight back. The man, in 1949 on a road outside Peekskill, New York, is Eugene Jacques Bullard, holder of the Croix de Guerre, holder of the Médaille Militaire, soon to be holder of the Légion d'honneur. The troopers do not know who he is. They are not interested in finding out. France did not forget. In 1959, the Republic of France named him a Chevalier of the Légion d'honneur. It was the 13th lifetime decoration his adopted country had given him. The medal was sent by mail to a small apartment in East Harlem. In the summer of 1960, President Charles de Gaulle came to New York on a state visit. His office sent a request to the French consulate. The President of France wished, while in the city, to see one particular man. They found Eugene Bullard at the elevator job. They drove him to the Waldorf Astoria in a borrowed suit. De Gaulle met him in a suite on an upper floor, took both his hands, called him by the name his squadron had used in 1916, and embraced him. The men who saw it said de Gaulle did not let go for a long time. A few weeks later, an NBC television producer who had heard the story showed up at Rockefeller Center with a camera crew. The Today Show interviewed Eugene Bullard, in his elevator operator's uniform, on national television. He told the story plainly. He did not raise his voice. He did not ask for anything. He went back to the elevator the next morning. He died on October 12th of 1961. He was 66 years old. The cause was stomach cancer. His apartment was very small. The French consulate in New York paid for the funeral. They buried him in the French War Veterans Cemetery in Flushing, Queens, in the dress uniform of a French legionnaire, with all 13 of his decorations on his chest. In 1994, 33 years after his death, the United States Air Force posthumously commissioned him as a second lieutenant. It was the rank he had been refused in 1917. In 2019, the town of Columbus, Georgia, the same town that his family had hidden from on the night of the mob, unveiled a bronze statue of him in its center. He is standing in a flight jacket. His arms are at his sides. He is looking at something a long way away. He flew combat over the Western Front before the United States allowed black pilots in its own military. He fought a second war for a country he had chosen, and he came home to a country he had been born in that would not give him work above a basement. One country embraced him in a hotel suite while he was still alive. The other put up a statue 40 years after he was dead. He served them both. He did not complain about either. He kept the ribbon under his lapel, and he opened the elevator doors, and he said, "Good morning, sir," and he went home at night to a small apartment in East Harlem where, on a shelf in a drawer, the medals of the Republic of France lay quietly side by side. If this story moved you, subscribe to follow the Untold Front. New stories every week.